We are still on Kubernetes. In the last session, we were able to set up a cluster comprising a manager node or a control plane and two worker nodes. And we were able to set up a cluster using the commands here. So we also went further to run few commands, right? We have these commands that I have highlighted here. So we're able to run some commands. We deployed a sample application using this, right? We also went further to expose the pod to a service, right? Which is the node pod service. Okay. So now what we were able to do the last time, running these commands was using the imperative approach to Kubernetes management. Other than the imperative approach, there is also the declarative approach. Okay, so what does declarative approach entail? Declarative approach entails the use of different files, manifest files, right? You can see I have some files set up here. So we have different files for different purposes, right? For example, you can see this manifest file. I named this Nginx node port service, right? This is to create a service, right? So a node port service, and we have this port open specifically. So how do we know the port to open, right? We can check, go on Google, right, and see what we can get. Let's say you want to see node ports range, node ports range. We can do this, right? It tells us the range, right, that we can have for a node port, right? So can always come here and fix a number, right, within that range. And you also want to make sure you get the range right. Okay, so that's that. So when you use a file to run, to manage your Kubernetes, you are looking at the declarative approach to Kubernetes management. Now, that said, let's see what we can do with what we have already set up. Okay, so let's take a look at what we have based on the commands we ran earlier, right? So let's take a look at what we did the last time. The last time we were able to, let's see, the last time we were able to, okay, yeah, we were able to create a sample deployment, right? We created a pod, right? Created a pod, and we created a service, a node port service. And okay, so now that we have this, let's see what we can get. Okay, we can come here and say kubectl. Let's start by checking the nodes we have. Remember the nodes? Get nodes. Let's see the nodes we have. Okay, so we have these nodes. This is a control plane, this a worker, and this is a second worker. Okay, that's fine. So what else can we get? Within the node, we'll have pods on which you can run containers, right? So I want to check for my, let's check for my pods. Okay, I have just one pod. Remember the one we created. So what else can we check? Remember, we created a service, right? A node port service so that we can expose this to the network, right? So let's see the available services. kubectl get services. So let's see the services we have. Okay, so we have this default cluster IP, and this is the one we created, right? So if you look at this that we created, right, you see, let's look at the command we ran again. So let's take a look at the command we ran. kubectl expose pod, which pod? Nginx demo, which we created here. Port 80, then we called the node type, the service type, node port, okay? So we didn't specify a particular port, right, within the range, but this was set up for us, right? And you can see it falls within the range that we searched, okay? So that's something that's happened. So let's check the endpoints, right? Let's check the endpoints. Endpoints. Let's get endpoints, okay? So you can see we have an endpoint set up, okay? So this looks good. So what we want to do now, right, is to look at how we can use the declarative approach to get things going as well, right? Just as we've been able to use imperative approach the last time. So let's look at getting the declarative approach going. So with declarative approach, we are looking at using a file, right? We'll use a file. So there's a command that is always constant, right? And that command is, let me comment it so it doesn't run. kubectl, right? You say apply. When you apply, you can apply, run the flag for file. Then you specify the file name. Remember, we mentioned earlier that we have files that will have set up, So the first thing we need to do is to save the file on here so that we can run this command to make it take effect. Okay, so let's say the file name is whatever, file name, okay, dot YAML, right? So that's file name dot YAML. So this is the file name, assuming, okay, it's a .yaml file. So this is something we'll need to use, right? So when you use the kubectl apply command, what it does is it creates, if the file has not been created before, then if the file has been in existence, what it does is that it updates, right? If, for example, you've created a file and you run this command again, maybe there have been some changes or whatever it is, you run this again, so it updates the file, right? So let's see what we can get out of this. The first thing we want to do, let's get familiar with some commands, right? Remember, we have these pods, right? So let's say I want to delete this pod. So what do I need to do? To delete this pod, I want to say kubectl, I want to delete pod. Which pod? This pod. Okay? I want to copy that and paste it here, right? kubectl delete pod nginx demo. So that pod has been deleted. Okay? So what else do I want to do? I might say I want to delete this service, right? This node pod service that I created, right? I want to delete this, for example. So what do I need to do? I say kubectl delete service. right? Speaking English, kubectl delete service. So what service do I want to delete? This one in particular, right? So I say delete. So it's been deleted. Okay, now what happens if I run this command? Kubectl get endpoint, right? Which I ran earlier. So let me use it. Top arrow to check that command. When I run this now, I see that this endpoint is gone, right? I didn't have to delete, right? It just shows that the connection is gone, right? So the endpoint is gone. So the endpoint here that we had here has disappeared. Okay, so now that we have this, we are now back to square one, right? Let's see services. We don't have that notepad service any longer. Let's see pods. Let's see what we have. No resources found, right? Because we've deleted the one and only pod we had. Now, we want to use the declarative approach, right? The declarative approach to getting things going. So what we want to do, let's say the last time we created a pod, okay? So I want to go to my bank of manifests. So I have this here, okay? So let's say we want to look at Nginx. Let's say Nginx pod, okay? Remember? So I'll copy this, right? I want to copy this. So once I copy this, I want to VI into a file, right? I'll call the file Nginx-demo. Let's call it Nginx-demo. I'll go to mobile hextem, right? I want to VI into a file. Let's clear this. Start on a clean slate. So let's call this VI into a file. Let's call it Nginx demo .yml. Okay, so I want to paste this in here. Then let's look at if we see anything familiar. Okay, now looking at our file, right? We have kind, we're specifying pod, right? We have the name, we called it Nginx pod. So container name here, we call it Nginx demo, right? And we have, what else we have? Image, Nginx. So where is this image coming from? Let me check on Docker Hub. You see, this is the image we have here, Nginx, right? So this is the image that we are talking about here. So we have Nginx. So container ports 80, right? That's for Nginx. So let's take a look at the command we ran in the last session, right? To generate what we had there. Okay, so the commands we ran, so let's take a look at the command we have here. You can see we have Nginx demo, right? That's the name. And we call this, remember the image, dash image, that's Nginx, right? The image we saw there. Then we have port 80. Okay, so this is what we have. So let's go ahead and do something with the file, right? So now let's save this file. We can save this file and Let's save this file. Escape, colon, WQ. Now that I've saved this file, I have nginx-demo.yaml, right? So to run this, remember that command we talked about earlier, kubectl, right? Kubectl, we want to apply what? Apply nginx demo.yaml. But before that, we need to specify the file flag, right? So kubectl apply -f, then you specify the file name. So let's do this. When we do this, we see a pod has been created. So let's check kubectl get pods. Remember the last time we saw that no resource was available. Now you see this pod, right? Nginx pod has been created, right? Using the manifest file. Okay, so what else? Let's see. Remember the command to get endpoints, right? You see, do we have an endpoint for this? No, we don't, right? Why don't we have an endpoint? Because a service is yet to be created, right? Remember the last time, to expose this on a service, to a service, what did we do? We ran this command, right? So what do we need to do now? I want a node port service. So to get a node port service, I want to come up here to my, let's go back to this file. That's my Kubernetes file bank. Okay, so I'm working on Nginx. I want to get a node port service. So this is the file I'm looking for. Okay, so Nginx node port service is the name I've created. So, and remember, I could have any ports, right? So I'm specifying a particular port. Okay, so the port I'm specifying here is 30,018, right? So I'm specifying this as a node port, okay? So 30,018 is the node port I'm specifying, right? So, and remember when we created the label earlier, the label was app column Nginx. So there should be consistency right here. So selector should also be app dot column Nginx. Okay, there should be some consistency there. Also, port here, right? You have target port. Remember, HTTP is on port 80, while HTTPS is on port 443. Okay, so now that we've established this, so we can just copy this file, right? There's a manifest file. We'll copy it and go back to our command line. So let's try to create VI into a file. Let's call this file node port service. Let's call it Nginx. Let's call it node port for Nginx. Right? Let's call this the name dot YML. Okay. So when I do this, I want to paste the content that we copied. Okay. Then we'll go through, we want to ensure that this is within the range. Okay, if it is not, we can change it. Okay, so also want to ensure that the selector here matches what we have here. Let me just open it up. Let's see that it matches what you have here under the labels, right? You can see app column Nginx. What you have under the metadata is what you have here under spec, right? So we want to make sure of this. So once you are done with that, we'll save column WQ, right? So now we can now use the command kubectl, say apply a file called node ports for nginx.yml. Okay, so when we run this, see a service has been created. So if we want to get service, right, services that we have, so I expect an additional service to have been added, a node port service. So what do? We say kubectl, right, get services, right? You see, this node port has been created. Okay, now something we couldn't achieve earlier when we searched, tried to get endpoints, right? So what did we see? We only saw the default one. So let's run that command again. Get endpoints. You see, we now have an endpoint, right? So this is all good. So basically, we'll be using our manifest files that we have set up here, right? We'll be using the manifest files that we have all set up. So we can always come here and pick what you want and modify it. As much as possible, they've been saved in a way that you can easily know what it's all about, right? You can see RBAC cluster row, right? You can see whatever it is you are looking for, you can always have something to work with. You can always have something to work with. So another important concept in Kubernetes is the use of namespaces. Okay, so what are namespaces? So namespaces are like, as the name sounds, namespace, right? So they are declarative regions that provide certain scope to the identifiers so that pods, containers, and functions specific to a particular environment or branch can be differentiated from others. For example, if you have a dev branch, right, and you have some things going on there, some containers, some certain pods, and all of that, specific to that branch, you want to ensure that it's separated from the one for the production branch, right, or the staging branch. Okay, so the reason for this is to ensure that you prevent name collision that may occur, right? Because this branch has this name and that other branch has the same name, and you find that there's a collision. So as much as possible, you want to create namespaces for these different guys. Okay, so when you create namespaces, you are able to isolate activities of this branch from the other branch. You're also able to ensure security, right? Like limiting who has access to what, right? And finally, it's also used for RBAC, which is role-based access controls. Okay. Now, to create a namespace, right? Also, just as we're able to use the imperative approach, we can also use declarative approach. So we'll be creating namespaces, right? We'll create one using a declarative approach, and we'll also create another using the declarative approach, imperative and declarative. Okay, so now that we have an understanding of what namespaces are, so let me look for something that we might have here for creating a namespace, right? So you can see this is a simple file for creating a namespace. Okay, so this is a simple file for creating a namespace. Okay, so we can modify this, right? So as much as possible, whatever you want, you can always get access and modify accordingly. Okay, now that we've done this, so the first thing we want to do is to check the existing namespaces, right? We want to see, are there namespaces? We've been working. Yes, we've been working. We've been working and we've been able to work in a certain namespace because there is a default namespace, right? So when those namespace is specified, you'll be set to work in the default namespace. Okay, so let's see what we have here. So what do we have? So to see the namespaces we have, we can run kubectl get namespaces kubectl get namespaces. You can see the default namespace that we have, right? So these were all generated, right? When we created the account 6 days, 22 hours ago. Okay, so now these are the existing namespaces we have. Okay, so to create a namespace, we can either use the imperative approach to Kubernetes management or the declarative approach. So let's start with the imperative approach. Okay, so to do that, remember kubectl one, we can say create, right? Create namespace. That's the instruction to create a namespace. So what name do you want to call the namespace that is to be created? Let's say we are trying to create a namespace for, let's say development branch. So you can say this is a particular namespace, right, that we are creating, so that the dev guys can get their containers, pods, and all of that created in that particular namespace. Okay, so click on this. So you see this namespace has been created. Okay, so if you see get namespace now, we can see a new namespace has been created. So what about using the declarative approach to creating a namespace, right? So let's say we want to create another namespace and want to call this namespace production, right? But I want to create a namespace and call it production, okay? So what do we do when we are in that situation? So what we'll need to do in that situation is to create a file as usual, right? Remember, we need to create a file. So I want to copy this, right, to create a namespace, right? So let me copy this and call it production namespace.yml or whatever it is I want to call it. Okay, so I'll come in here. I'll create a VI into namespace.yml. Okay, so I paste this here. Okay, let's say the name I want to call was this kind namespace tells you what it is, right? Kind always tells you, oh, is it a service, right? Is it a pod? Is it a deployment? Is it this? Is it that? So this time around, it's namespace, right? It's namespace we are creating. So, but what name do you want to call the namespace? Remember, we mentioned production. We have development that we've created earlier. I have production, right? Can create this namespace. So escape column WQ. Okay. So now that we have this, remember to create anything, service, board, namespace, whatever it is you want to create, always remember your cube CTL apply. Apply what? A file called namespace.yml. Okay, so I want to click on enter. So when I click on enter, I see that a namespace called production has been created. So let's see the available namespaces we have. kubectl get namespaces. Okay, so if I run this, I see that I have production created and active since 20 seconds ago. So this is how to create a namespace. This is how to create a namespace. So we've seen how we can get services, how we can create namespace and all of that. So there's just a lot we can do, but as much as possible, let's explore, let's take a look at the manifest files and explore, and we'll see in the next session. Thank you for your time. Bye for now.